to Backstage Live. We're here with Cynthia Green, who is the author of Brainpower Game Plan.
That's right.
Let's talk about how to boost your brain power. I hear you've got a couple of tips for us just to stay healthy, mind and body.
Exactly. And also for those of us who are unemployed, because that's one of the focuses today, also what you can do in that downtime to keep your brain sharp. So one of the first things that we can do is exercise. We're not really always aware that being in good physical shape relates to our brain health and to keeping our memory sharp, but indeed it does. And so if you think about it, what's good for your heart is good for your brain. We all know what we need to do for our heart in terms of exercise and diet. So one of the first things I like to tell people is to look to keep your body in good shape. It's going to do a lot for keeping your mind sharp, and also may have the added benefit of reducing your risk for dementia down the road.
And that exercise is just as simple as 30 minutes a day. Take a walk around the neighborhood or, a light jog.
Exactly.
It doesn't have to be intense.
Most of the studies, in fact, that have been done relating memory health to exercise have been done with people who just walk. And 30 minutes about 4 to 5 times a week seems to be really the base of what you need to do. There's also some really interesting studies that have looked at complex exercises, things like juggling or ballroom dancing, where they've shown that it actually improves everyday memory performance because you have to remember those steps. You have to really be able to pay attention and to concentrate right when you're doing something like juggling. So the other thing is to take up something really cool and different like that. If you're not doing it already, it's a great way to give your brain a good workout.
And that complex activity doesn't necessarily have to be a physical activity. I hear you also say knitting. It's taking up an instrument.
Right. So my second tip to keep your brain healthy and your mind sharp is to look to engage intellectually. Challenge your mental envelope, if you will, so that you're trying something new and novel and creative all the time. One of my best stories is I ran into a guy in Florida when I was giving a keynote talk where he, as a New Year's resolution, took up something new every year. And that year he was learning to play guitar. So what this does is it keeps our mind flexible and nimble, and it challenges us to think in different ways. It even encourages new neuronal growth, new brain cell growth, and new connections between our brain cells. There's some evidence that that may reduce our risk for dementia as well. So if you're unemployed or if you're retired, don't stop. Keep going. Find new things, take up that new hobby that you've been putting off, try something completely different. It's a great time to do it.
And even something like a puzzle or a crossword puzzle, right?
Even little things that we can do, like brushing our teeth with our non-dominant hand, or going out.
I saw that in the research last night, and I tried it, and I got so frustrated I stopped.
But what's amazing about it is when you brush your teeth, you don't really stop to think, and your brain's kind of working this old routine. But if you do it with the opposite hand, suddenly it throws everything off, and you have to think about it. Or try reading an article backwards rather than starting at the beginning of the article, start at the end and read it backwards. There's all kinds of fascinating things that we can just change up a little bit to make it more interesting for our brain and to challenge our brain to think a little bit differently. There's a lot of tips like that in the book, and those are wonderful exercises. They're not necessarily on the same level as taking up an instrument or learning a new language, but it's something small that we can do every day to challenge the way that we think. Take a different route to work, right? So you're not always going the same way.
And so pointer number 3.
Point number 3 is to challenge your everyday skills by playing games that you play against the clock. Why? Because games we play against the clock are things that are going to challenge the kinds of skills that we need every day, that can change as we grow older, and that we get less of a challenge for if we're not working, if we're not engaged in that daily give and take that we had on the job or in the office. So what are they? Attention, speed, and flexibility, and even, in some cases, short-term memory. So if we want to challenge all those things, we can play games.
Board game night. I knew board game night with my friends.
Exactly.
Serve a greater purpose.
But the kinds of games you need to play are ones that you play against the clock. Because if you think about it, if you play chess and you allow yourself to languish and take all the time you want to think about those moves, it's not going to get you to think quickly. You can play chess against the clock, or you can play a game like Boggle. That's a great example because there are a lot of people who like crossword puzzles or Scrabble or word games, but they're not timed. Boggle is a word game that's timed, so it's a great alternative. The other thing is there's a lot of software games out there that talk about being for the purpose of brain fitness. And what they really do is offer you that opportunity to work out those skills. It's very important to stay sharp with those everyday performance skills, and those games are ways of doing it, and they're fun.
So this is really just a big plug for Dance Dance Revolution.
Exactly.
That's filling all sorts of categories here.
And in fact, there have been studies on Dance Dance Revolution specifically showing that it improves memory. Because if you think about it, it's actually exercise, and you're having to remember steps in order. It's very hard. It's also a plug for things like the free games that you find online, and for people who want to take it one step further, for some of those brain fitness software games. They really aren't all about brain fitness. You really need to get away from your desk and go for a walk, do the exercising, engage intellectually. But what they do is work out those skills in the same way that a personal trainer might. But you don't have to do that. You can get Boggle. You can play a game called Simon. You can play those free games on the computer. There's a lot of great sites that you can play games on. Just do something where you're trying to beat the clock, and that will give you the best bang for your buck.
And finally, you say just be social.
Right. You know, social engagement is a wonderful thing that we can do for our brain. First of all, when it comes to those skills I just mentioned, when you are socially engaged, you have the give and take of conversation. You have to pay attention. Otherwise, you're going to get totally lost. You have to think quickly, and you have to think flexibly. You have to be able to shift between what you're thinking about saying, following the conversation, and the other cues in the environment. So when we're socially engaged, we're getting a good skills workout in terms of our everyday intellectual skills. The other thing is that there are studies that have shown that when we're socially engaged, we're reducing our risk for memory impairment down the road. Probably it has a lot to do with the kinds of situations in which we're engaged. We get out of our own little world. We go out with friends for dinner. We go to theater. We volunteer in our community. These are all great ways to work out our brain overall. So there's a lot of layers to social engagement. But those four things, if we exercise, if we stay intellectually engaged, if we maintain our everyday intellectual skills, and if we stay socially engaged, we'll do a lot to keep our brains healthy.
And above all else, maintain a sense of happiness and fulfillment in life, if you know.
That's right, because there's a lot to be said about feeling good about ourselves and feeling good about our memory and about our brain health. What I find people don't realize is there's a lot that we really can do to think more clearly day to day, to keep our mind sharp, and to maintain brain health and reduce our risk. It's a matter of our lifestyle and our choices, and there's a lot of power that we have to make that better.
And now you're at the Mount Sinai Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. Is that right?
Yes, I'm affiliated with Mount Sinai Medical Center here in New York. I'm on the faculty in the Department of Psychiatry, and I also have a company called Memory Arts, where I provide memory and brain health training.
Now, do you have stories, incidents where you have actually seen that you have helped save someone from, a worse fate? Having them engage in these exercises, and you've actually seen their brain function improve.
Yes, absolutely. In my latest book, Brainpower Game Plan, we had a test panel try the program before we published the book to make sure that the program was working. And my colleagues over at Prevention Magazine got together a great group, and they went through the program. And some of them improved. Well, all of them improved. Some of them improved tremendously. One woman improved on a test of memory and everyday skills performance that we put together, 78%. After having gone through the program. Now, she was someone who, in her own words, was, suffering greatly. She wasn't exercising. She was overweight. She was having a lot of medical complaints as a result of her poor health. Emotionally, she was feeling very challenged. So she really took that program head on, and she really participated in it completely. She did every recipe, every exercise, but she saw tremendous benefit. And it's really rewarding from my perspective, because these are small changes, these are common sense approaches. This is not about popping a supplement. This is about things that you can really do and change in your day-to-day life to feel better and to think more clearly.
Difference.
Absolutely.
But unfortunately, the sad truth is there are some people that you can't help. Isn't that right?
Well, dementia is a disease. Alzheimer's is the most common cause of dementia in this country. But what people are unaware of is often, especially in the earlier stages of the disease, it's very important to get evaluated. There are medications that are most beneficial in the earlier stages of the illness. And there are other things, such as physical exercise, that can help slow the progression of the disease. Perhaps there's some early studies for that. But more importantly, improve quality of life. And there's ways of engaging people in activities and keeping their quality of their time meaningful. So while there may be a diagnosis, it's not something where kind of everything stops. And really, folks need to think through what next. You know, what will be the way to engage, not only to address it medically, but to address it through lifestyle intervention as well.
Let's see. We've got some questions from our chat room.
Okay.
If you've got some time.
Cynthia, going back to your point about being social, are social networks through the computer just as good as socializing in person, or is there a difference?
That's a great question. Is there a difference between socializing online versus socializing in person? And I've thought about that. And I think that the answer is really that socializing online gets you something, right? You get the interaction, and certainly a lot of the social networks we use are for support around certain kinds of issues. So we might get support, for example, around health issues that are of particular concern to us, or parenting issues. On the other hand, it's not the same as having to react in terms of the body language, which you're going to be hearing about also later today, to those nonverbal cues in terms of attention and processing speed and that kind of thing. So no, it doesn't give you that benefit. So it gives you the benefit potentially of social support and of feeling like you are cared for and in a social network, but it's not going to give you the kind of skills workout that being face-to-face will do.
Person to person. Nothing is going to replace that contact.
Right.
Let's see, Rick, do we have any other questions from our chat room?
Well, I have one question for Cynthia, and that is, does the brain work differently at different times of the day? Is there something to being a morning person or not being a morning person? Because I'm not a morning person, and here I am trying to act like I am.
Not a morning person over here and working on morning TV.
What time is it?
Absolutely, there is something to the idea that we all have different rhythms in terms of when we feel that we can think more clearly or not. And I have 3 kids. I see differences between them, and they are most closely genetically related to each other than to anybody else on the planet. So it's something that's very unique to each of us, and what I advise people to do, especially for work, or if you're unemployed and you're interviewing, try to think through when you are at your best. Recognize what your pattern is, and then try to schedule things. So, for example, I know I can write best in the morning. So if I'm working on a book or an article, I try to set aside that time in the morning and not answer my email, not answer the phone, dedicate my time then, and then in the afternoon when I'm slower and when I'm feeling kind of draggy, that's when I do the things that don't take as much intellectual currency, right? That's when I can answer all those emails and go through my messages and answer phone calls and do things that are less demanding. So it's something that we can learn about ourselves that can really make a difference in terms of our day-to-day experience.
Absolutely.
Great question.
Yeah, thanks, Rick.
Sure. And we have another question from the
great.
chat room. What are the best ages where children are most receptive to learning new information?
What are the best ages for kids to learn? Kids are learning sponges. They really are. Their job is to learn. That is the job of their brain. So certainly, up until their teens seems to be when they are most apt to learn. But we can learn up into, certainly at that rate, our early 20s. And let's face it, we learn lifelong. A lot of times people think that we can't learn as we grow older, that the brain is static. That's completely not true. And we know now that we can learn always. So, and that learning changes our brain physiologically by changing the connection between our brain cells through our neurons, and potentially by creating new brain cells. So we may not be kids anymore, but we still have that potential at all ages.
Great. Well, is that everything from the chat room, Rick?
I think so.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much, Cynthia.
Thank you
for
very
taking
much.
the time to stick around with us. I really appreciate it.
It was a real pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.